in Australia and also with the people I was lucky enough to work with in the United States, a horseman was something that was held in very high esteem. So something to be respected, someone to be respected. And it wasn't just knowing the techniques of the horseman, it was just not knowing how to do things, but also how to be. And I've always been passionate about that. I guess I always wanted to be a horseman. Hi everybody, Andy Booth here with you, coming to you from France, near Bordeaux. So at our lovely place here, just out of Bordeaux in France. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit today about something called horseman science. Now, horseman science is something that I started a few years ago now in France, and it's something pretty interesting where I've always been really passionate about horsemanship. I grew up in Australia. I guess in our culture, you know, I know some of the best sport riders, show jumpers, dressage riders and things in Australia. And I know some of the best horsemen in Australia, and those horsemen are equally, if not more, respected than the great sport riders. It might be something cultural, but to be a horseman, you know, it's just not a word that you throw out there really easily. And probably here in Europe sometimes I hear the translation of horseman used here in France a bit, and it's thrown around a little lightly. You know, someone's a good rider, so he's a horseman. Someone's got a few horses, or he's bred a few horses, so he's a horseman. And I know in Australia and also with the people I was lucky enough to work with in the United States, a horseman was something that was held in very high esteem. So something to be respected, someone to be respected. And it wasn't just knowing the techniques of the horseman, it was just not knowing how to do things, but also how to be the person that is a horseman, you know. And there's something special about those people when you meet them. It's not just the things they know how to do, it's also the way they know how to be around horses. And I've always been passionate about that. I guess I always wanted to be a horseman. And it might be just a coincidence. My name, Andrew, comes from andros, means man, from the Greek. And my second name, Philip, means who likes horses. So, you know, maybe it's just a coincidence that my name is the man that likes horses. But it's always been the case. And I guess horsemanship, the way I interpreted it, was a greater understanding of the horse, to be able to be better with the horse, to better educate the horse. In the beginning, as I grew up in Australia, so I looked at these horsemen and some of the people that turned up at home on the family farm to break in the horses, as we called it in those days. It's probably not the greatest term, breaking in. I wouldn't translate that into French. They probably wouldn't appreciate it too much. But the men that turned up to start the young horses, and you know, there was everything in there. There was some of them that the work was really nice and clean. Sometimes it was dusty and sweaty and violent. And there was a little bit of everything. And later in life, as I travelled around Australia, I went for a bit of a trip. It was only supposed to last a year or so. I think it lasted about 3 years. I worked my way up into the north of Australia and across the top, and eventually back home a few years later. And I got to see different facets of, you know, how you would go about breaking in or starting a young horse. Some of what I saw, you know, caused me to want to know more and want to learn how to do that. And some of what I saw caused me to really want to know how to do that even better, so that I didn't have to ever see that again. And I didn't really know, I guess, in those days exactly what I was seeing, and I was easily influenced. And you know, that, oh no, you've got to hobble them up and lay them down, and you've got to show them who's the boss, and you've got to break their spirit, and you've got to dominate. And you know, if they lay down on you, that's just because they don't want to work. And some of the techniques and things, you know, if they're rearing up, you've got to crack an egg on their head and things. It's pretty complicated when you're up on 2 legs on a horse to find that egg and crack on the top of his head. So, and I saw a little bit of everything. I thought one of the secrets to starting horses might be to learn how to stick on them a bit better. And so as I was working around Australia, I tried my hand at bronc riding and went to the rodeos, climbed on just about anything. I could stick like a tick in general, but I certainly wasn't ever going to become a rodeo professional. I probably at that time should have been looking more at how in the world am I going to teach horses better so I don't have to do this, but I didn't go down that track. I tried to learn how to stick a bit better. I thought that might be the kind of the mark of a horseman or a breaker, as we called them in those days, would be knowing how to stick on one. And I was lucky enough at one point. I was working on a big station, on a cattle station, as we call them, and the boss, he said, there's a guy come out from America. He's going to be starting a horse in town, and you know, you might want to go along and have a look at that. So just, you know, it's amazing all sort of circumstances, they fall into place, and if that hadn't happened, then the next thing wouldn't happen and nothing would have been like it is. and so just luckily I went in that weekend, and you know, I was not far from the town where I grew up, and watched this American do this colt starting demonstration. And I hadn't actually heard the whole process explained like that. To be honest, I'd been riding horses, gone to pony club, done all the competitions, the gymkhanas and the show jumping, and tried my hand at rodeo and camp drafting, a little bit of everything. And I didn't even know that how horses learn things. I didn't even realize, I guess at that point, that it wasn't what you did, but when you stopped doing it, I didn't realize what motivates horses to find responses. And just the basics of it, you know, I knew a bit. I knew horses ate grass and I knew how to stick on one, but there was a lot of stuff that I didn't know at that time. And I guess it was like, you know, learning how to put the buttons on the horse and say, okay, this is go and this is whoa and this is turn. And I think there was so many little things that now I realize that it makes it makes the big difference. Especially understanding how to use pressure, understanding little things like if I was going to put fly spray on a horse, you know, back in those days, the horse might have got a bit scared, and I'd stop the horse, I'd stop the fly spray because the horse was getting a bit bothered, and I probably wouldn't even have known that all I was doing was teaching the horse to move away from the fly spray. That every time I stopped because he was scared, I was just teaching him that, you know, the flight response was the best thing you could do, and I was installing those things. And then I'd go and accuse the horse of being stupid or something for doing what I taught him to do. You know, which when I look back on it, I think, oh, those poor horses, you know, they were sacrificial lambs, the number of horses that I did terrible things to with all the best intentions. You know, I've always loved horses. I never wanted to do the wrong thing by one, but just being, I guess, incompetent. But I was in that phase of unconsciously incompetent. You know, I just didn't know that I didn't know. I think now in the 21st century, if we're not looking for answers and we're still doing things like I was doing back in the 80s, probably it's not just incompetence, it's irresponsible, because the information's out there, you know. And I've been around the world a bit now, and I know that good horsemanship's out there, and I know if someone wants it, they can find it. I had the chance in the late 90s, I won what's called a Queen's Trust Award, which was an award from the Queen. Same story, you know, just circumstances, and I thought that maybe the way horses were getting started in Australia, I started to really look at what the good horsemen in America were doing. You know, we in Australia were calling them whisperers at the time. We didn't actually know a lot about that, and some of the great horsemen were coming out in the late 70s, all through the 80s, 90s, and bringing that good horsemanship into the country, and good horsemen were learning that and applying it, and so the culture was changing and the information was getting out there, and it's kind of moved into the Australian culture. I think good horsemanship, there's still probably bad horsemanship out there, but gee, the level is improved, I think, dramatically. A lot of people talk about the good old days, but you know, I've got a pretty clear memory of what I saw breaking in horses through the through the late 70s and through the 80s and what I see today, and there's really drastic improvement. And those great horsemen, some of them were better with horses than they were with people, and some of them were really good with the people but maybe not as good with the horses as some. And it didn't really matter. The funny thing that happened that was probably a bit of a shame was that people started to jump into their, as we say over here, into their chapel. So meaning that I follow this horseman and I follow that horseman and I like this one and I don't like that one. And people seem to get into a phase where they were worried more about who was right rather than what was right. And that's probably a little bit of a pity. I think that's getting better now. I'm not in the States anymore. I'm living over here in Europe, and this type of horsemanship is kind of new over here, but I'll talk more about how things are done here. And I think it's very interesting to travel and have an open mind and say, okay, is this the only way, or are there other ways? What are they doing in Europe? I mean, we're turning out hundreds of thousands of high quality sport horses. Someone must be doing something right. They're not all ending up at the meatworks and we're not all ending up busted up. So, someone's getting something right over here, and then there's techniques in different countries, and travel and look and learn. And as I was sort of growing up, watching all this different horsemanship and learning from some of the greats, and watching people say, well, I'm following him and I like his technique, but I don't like this technique, and everyone picking their teams. Yeah, I think we could have probably concentrated more at the time and, okay, let's look at what's right rather than who's right, and try and globally have an open mind and improve horsemanship. Anyway, those adventures took me through several years in the United States, and I didn't only learn the horsemanship part but also the teaching part. I guess in the younger days I would have preferred to work more with the horses and probably less with the people. And now as the years have gone by and the body's not as good as it used to be, I'm going more towards teaching the people. And I guess I have had to realize also that if you don't help the people, you don't really help the horses anyway. If you're just training the horses and then you're giving them back and the people haven't got the information to continue down that same philosophy, down that same way of doing and seeing things, it's not going to turn out. I think it was Albert Einstein that said, no problem can be solved by the same the same knowledge that caused the problem. So, if you want to solve the problem, you probably have to change, rather than change the horse or change the bit or change the saddle, or change yourself first. And that's where becoming a horseman, gets into the whole equation. So I travelled and looked and learned and had just a fabulous time in the States, and then I was invited to come and work here in Europe, and the culture shock was pretty amazing. In different countries just don't see things the same way. So I moved over here and suddenly horses were living in boxes, in stables, way more. The whole equitation world was very, very technical. I was taking lessons, learning, how to do two-track work and stuff like that. You need to be pretty well educated just to understand it. The horse has to be in the concave position, and the outside hind has to be in the same track as the inside front, and the back has to be doing this, and the horse's neck has to be here, and the hind quarters will come down, and that'll charge the inside hind leg, and that'll go in under the body and start being the impulsion leg and pushing the. Whew, and it was, it was like, it was very, very technical, and there wasn't a lot of that, the psychology. Okay, how does the horse learn, understand, assimilate all this information? So I thought, well, this would be good, because with the horsemanship that I've learned and the equitation that they've got here, we could maybe bring those two together and do something interesting. So throughout or maybe from about 2000 through to 2010, I really concentrated primarily on how can we get a better foundation on these horses. The equitation was already good, so if we get a better foundation, we can go further, and things worked out really well for me. So I was mostly working with the young horses. I was teaching people and horses, teaching the horses how to have a good foundation, teaching people how to teach the horses to have a good foundation, and then the quality of the equitation that was following on was really good. And as I was thinking about it, I was thinking, well, there's several chapters to the whole equitation story. So maybe the first thing would be the understanding of what is a horse, how does a horse learn and understand things. And the next thing, so I'd call it the comprehension, and the next thing after that would be the foundation, and then there would be the equitation, and then the competition. And a lot of horses were going pretty fast into competition. You know, there wasn't necessarily a great level of a foundation in there, and people were starting with equitation and then going pretty direct equitation competition, and the whole comprehension and the foundation was a bit light. So I found myself a place in that industry is probably putting the first couple of chapters in place, putting in the chapter comprehension, this is how the horse learns and understands things, foundation, and then they'd take it from the equitation and the competition. And as I started trying to understand more, okay, let's understand the horse better, that took me more into the science. And over here in Europe, it's pretty, I suppose Cartesian might be the word. The whole anthropomorphic view of horses is not the same. I know as I passed time in the United States, the way people looked at horses was, okay, well, it's there's this whole hierarchy idea, and you've got to show the horse who's the leader, and the horse will respect you for that, because. And then as I looked into the way things were done here, there was a little bit more science in it. And of course I went back towards Australia and found some great scientists out of Australia who helped me incredibly. And rather than looking at it from an anthropomorphic point of view, saying, okay, what actually happens? What goes on inside that head? What are, and as we talk about the cognitive responses, how is the horse learning things? How is his brain working? Is his brain like our brain? How is the horse able to decide to do right and wrong, or good and bad? And I've seen some posts about that on the social media and things recently, and it's interesting because I see, especially in the English-speaking world, people are having trouble digesting that. I think, you know, there's a funny thing, a picture, and it was lies that flatter, and there was a great queue of people in wanting to have lies that flatter, and then there was another queue of people here, which was for the bitter truth, and nobody wanted the bitter truth. Everyone wanted the lies that flatter. And as I got into science, well, science is pretty honest territory. It's into the bitter truth. And looking at those posts on social media that explain relatively clearly, there isn't a prefrontal cortex, there isn't that frontal lobe in the brain like we have. Horses don't know right from wrong and good from bad. The horse couldn't intentionally be wrong. You know, I wasn't shocked by that. I thought, well, that sounds right. I mean, I did clinics with some of the greatest horsemen, or the most legendary ones, the best known ones anyway. And I remember from many, many clinics, you know, those great horsemen often saying, he's not doing it to be wrong. You know, that was one, that line there, I must have heard that 100 times. Getting into trouble with a horse, and the big boss saying, he's not doing it to be wrong. You know, so don't blame the horse. If it's all going wrong, that's because you're getting it wrong. Now, fix yourself, and then the horse will get better. And so, you know, when it was explained, you know, horses don't do things right and wrong. They just try to take care of themselves and find their way through this thing. So I wasn't terribly shocked by that. But I see on the social media when people start explaining, okay, well, you know, the horse couldn't be wrong, he wouldn't know how to be wrong, he doesn't intentionally, and even the bad things that horses do, you know, they're not trying to be bad, they're just trying to find solutions to problems, and the problem is often the human putting pressure on the horse can't find a way to remove that pressure, and ends up finding a solution that works for the horse. And so, you know, it might be a problem for the human, but for the horse it's turned out to be a really good solution, and that horses spend way too much time learning things that they should just never have to learn. And that didn't surprise me at all, you know, that seemed to be common sense. And the more I looked at science, it just clarified things, it made things way more clearer. But I think in order, and especially looking at how we look at horses here in Europe, I think in order to accept that science, maybe be able to question things and maybe question our own beliefs. I think in anything that we do, we need to say, okay, well, this is what I think, and I'll question that. I'll debate my own ideas. And one of the things, you know, that I had to do as I looked more into the science of how what is actually going on, is it was questioning ideas that I have. Okay, can the horse be disrespectful, or is he just poorly educated? Because if I look at the horse as if he's being disrespectful, well then that's the horse's fault, isn't it? But if I say he's just poorly educated, well then that might be my fault, and that's a little bit harder to accept than just blaming the horse. And so I got really passionate about the science and trying to understand, okay, how does the brain work? How do horses learn things? How could we teach the horse to be not scared of the environment? You know, you can go back to the basics and say, okay, the horse is a prey animal. So how do we help that horse not be controlled by the external environment? And probably in looking in the equitation that we have here in Europe, you look at those horses go into those big indoor arenas. You know, there's 5,000 people sitting around the outside. There's a great big screen in the middle that's always changing colours with different images of the last competitor who's just gone out. One horse is going one way out the tunnel, the other horse has to go the opposite direction, straight into the middle of a great open space, apart from the fact that there's great 1.60 metre jumps out there with all sorts of colours and bushes and things, and 5,000 people clapping and cheering and screaming and eating and going on. You know, those horses have to be pretty well prepared for that, so you wouldn't want to be having any illusions about what's actually going on, and really see things as they are, and not be making any little stories up there that might flatter our own understanding of things. So Europe's been a pretty good experience for me. These sport horses, you're looking at horses that are worth literally millions and millions of euros. You don't want to make mistakes with those horses. They're way too valuable. They're worth more than my house. And also, you know, they're kind of like a Formula One, you know. So they can do other things, you know, and they should be going out and trotting in the forest and all those sort of things, but they have been selectively bred for a purpose. And so as we're working with those horses, we have to say, okay, how can I get the horse through this? How can I help him go into these big indoor arenas? How can I help him, you know, load up into aeroplanes? And, you know, he could be in Sweden tomorrow, and then next week he'll be in Madrid, and then the week after that he'll be in Greece somewhere. So these are horses that, and I learned a lot working with those horses. I was lucky in 2004, there was a dressage horse having a few fear problems going into the arena and getting all scared out there alone. The horse had all the moves, you know, potentially a terrific Olympic Grand Prix horse, but being scared and things, there was movement mistakes, he was making mistakes, and you know, whether you're in dressage or whether you're in show jumping, stress and fear causes faults, it causes mistakes. So we have to work a lot with that, and that was one of the areas where I really started to specialize. And having the techniques that I learned from horsemanship, and having the science that I learned from the great scientists, and I brought out a guy in 2006 by the name of Dr. Andrew McLean. He came out and started teaching some seminars and things here in France. And equitation science, the techniques are relatively classic, but it all makes so much sense. And horsemanship, the techniques are kind of special. They come from another world, but they're so effective. And I thought, wow, if I could understand the science and I could understand the horsemanship and the equitation level over here, if we could bring all that together. Now, one of the things that became reasonably obvious is that you just about need to learn to live 3 lifetimes in order to learn to live that lifetime. You'd have to get pretty old in order to get that done, because to master the subject of horsemanship, to master the subject of equitation, and to master the science, you know, that's a whole lifetime of work. And I think becoming the best horseman we can is a whole lifetime of work. So for quite a long time now, about 20 years, I've been working on that over here in Europe, and I brought out Horseman Science, and in the beginning it was a series of DVDs and it was very popular, and then we went on to online learning, and it's become terribly popular. So, you know, now I've got thousands of clients here in Europe, and I only work in French, so sometimes I'm probably even making mistakes with my English while I'm talking to you, because I don't speak English very much anymore. I only speak French, but I've kept that Australian accent probably. And while I've been working at trying to bring those worlds together, there's been a lot of people that I know that speak English and say, okay, you really need to get that for us. Now, it's not going to please everyone when I start explaining, okay, this is how the horse's brain works. There'll be things in there like, you know, the horse couldn't be disrespectful, he couldn't try to be wrong, that horses don't know right from wrong, good from bad, the way the brain works, that sometimes, you know, for a lot of people that's going to be a bitter truth. It'll be a little bit too difficult to digest, and I understand that. But, you know, one of the things that's been really important here, especially working with these high-level show horses, is you've got to know what's really going on. There's no space in there for making bad interpretations. Bad interpretations can lead people to make bad decisions. You know, they say, oh, the horse is wrong, so I'll need to show him who's the boss. Even things like, you know, really understanding there is no hierarchy interspecies. So, you know, there is within the intra-species, there is within horses, there's a hierarchy, but, you know, there isn't really human-horse hierarchy. And some people won't like that, and that's okay, I understand that. But I've seen when people are interpreting things incorrectly, I've seen the actions. You know, oh, the horse is being disrespectful, so I'll get hard on the horse. Now, the horse isn't being disrespectful, he's just learned something he shouldn't have learned, and he's trying something that normally would work, and now it's not working, and he's all confused, and now he's getting afraid, and now the human's getting hard on him, and it's all coming undone. And so interpreting things, making bad interpretations leads to bad decisions, which leads to bad results. So what I've been getting lots and lots of questions, people saying, okay, can we have that? Now, I've sort of been a little bit hesitant. I've been working here in France, and I know how the French see horses, and I admire their understanding of horses and equitation. And I know how the rest of the world sees horses, and I thought, wow, if I open this can of worms, not everyone's going to like it. But there is a lot of interest out there, so I've thought, well, I will open this can of worms, and we'll see what can be done with that. So that can of worms is going to get open here in the next few months, and I'll just keep bringing out videos and maybe explaining, you know, how we in Europe, I'm Australian, but how the Europeans see horses, and how maybe some of the things that we're doing here, and some of the science that I've picked up, and some of the horsemanship that I've picked up throughout the years, how maybe bringing those things together could lead people to get better results, and maybe avoid people getting into interpreting things in the wrong way, because I don't think anyone's trying to be wrong, either horses or humans, but sometimes, you know, there just needs to be a little bit more clarification in there, and when things get clear, people do better. So in the next few months, I'll keep filming things, and maybe talking about how the point of view maybe of what a horseman might see things, maybe in equitation, what techniques might work, and as far as the scientific point of view, what's actually going on in the horse's head, and why things are going right and why things are going wrong, and talk about those things. And it might just lead a few of us to have a more open mind and maybe not interpret things the way we always did. Because I think as you travel around the world, a lot of people think that there's one way of doing things. There isn't. There's certainly not one equestrian technique. You know, even here within one country, I've been getting lots of lessons in different disciplines, and I've had Olympic riders tell you to do one thing, something one way, and then another Olympic rider to tell you to do the same thing a different way, and they're all right. It just depends how you explain it to the horse. So, as I said before, if we're not explaining it to the humans, then it makes it harder for them to explain it to the horse. So, I'll be really concentrating on you and explaining to humans, okay, this is how we're seeing things, this is how it's working out for us, and that may be interesting, and you might pick up a few tips. There's nothing to sell at the end of this video or anything. They'll be coming out on YouTube, and I'll be sharing an international point of view. So what horseman science really is horsemanship, explaining the science behind what's really going on, and Horseman Science International is something that I'm starting up now. And Horseman Science International is just with a more global point of view on, okay, this is how, you know, one lot of people might see a situation, and this is how it might actually be going on, and this is the science behind it, and who knows, we might all pick up something. So that'll be the best way to move things forward and make a better deal for the horses. Thanks a lot for your interest, and we'll see you soon for the next videos.